Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Office of Public Records Emancipation Day program looking at Black resistance and the Civil War. And today we have with us Dr. Roger Davidson of Bowie State University. And before I introduce Dr. Davidson, I will introduce our Secretary of the District of Columbia, Kimberly Bassett.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being on the call tonight. I like to say happy Emancipation Day week. This is a huge week for Mayor Bowser and all of us. We celebrate Emancipation Day all the time in OPR, but we are definitely celebrating it now. We have a week of events. We have an amazing weekend planned. We have a breakfast, a concert series. We have the parade, and all of these things. Dr. Matthews will put in the chat so that you all can attend our events. We are so excited to have Roger Davidson with us tonight. He is so dynamic. I can't wait to hear about Black resistance in the Civil War. For me, it's not something that I know a lot about, and so I look forward to learning as much as I can tonight from Dr. Davidson. So get your popcorn ready. Also, before we start, I'd like to thank Dr. Lopez Matthews, who's our state archivist. He's been here for a year. We are so excited. We're excited that we're also building a new DC archives at UDC. Lots is happening right now in our department and in my agency, and I would just like to thank him for his leadership. I also see a few of his team members, staff members on the call as well. Thank you for all the support that you have given us as well. So take care, enjoy, and I'm going to let Dr. Matthews take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary. And I'm going to just start by introducing tonight's speaker. And Roger Davidson is Associate Professor of History at Bowie State University. He is the son and nephew of World War II veterans and a civilian track graduate of the Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets, Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. As a graduate student at Howard University, he served as a research assistant on the African American Civil War Sailors Project, a multi-year Department of Defense and National Park Service funded effort to identify all possible sailors of African descent that served in the United States Navy during the Civil War, as well as document their service. His master's thesis, They've Never Been Known to Falter, the first USCT in War and Peace, and PhD dissertation, Yankee River's Rebel Shores, takes a social history approach to Civil War military and naval studies. He has served as a consultant to the Marine Corps Museum and Heritage Center and appeared in several documentaries on the Civil War and Emancipation. And he is also the person who introduced me to the field of archive. So I always thank him for that, and I appreciate him being with us today. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Davidson.
All right, thank you very much. It's always good to see you, Dr. Matthews. Good evening to everyone. Today, I'm to speak on resistance during the Civil War era. I will diverge a bit because instead of just reading directly from slides, and I will have a slide presentation, I want to open another discussion that's related to resistance in the Civil War era and is directly related to resistance in the Chesapeake and in my hometown of Washington, D.C. I'll start off by discussing white supremacy, resistance to white supremacy. We're talking about the Civil War, and as we know, the root cause of the Civil War was slavery. But what undergirds slavery in the United States, what allows it to occur in many ways is that you see one group as different and inherently created to toil, while another group is supposed to manage and enjoy the fruits of that labor. And so in the United States, or what was colonial America before it became the United States, and the 1619 Project brings this out, you get Africans coming to British North America in 1619. And over time, uh, uh, the creation of an African slave-based uh, a labor system, one in which enslaved Africans and people of African descent will be toiling for others. Now, after the Revolutionary War, just to throw this out there, you'll have there's gradual emancipation in the North. The northern states, formerly the northern colonies, as we all know, were not wedded to slavery. 10% of the free and enslaved people combined, 10% of those people of African descent reside in the North. However, 90% are in the South. And the South is wedded to slavery, dependent upon it. And when you're dependent on something economically, well, your culture and your society grows around, and whatever you do there to make your money, or whatever kind of culture that evolves around this system is going to bleed into your politics. And that's why slavery will be the root cause of the Civil War. But we cannot ignore the role of white supremacy, because you don't enslave an equal. I'm going to use a quote. I'm going to read a passage from Donald Jacobone. He's a well-known historian. I've done some research for him in the past. But from his book, Teaching White Supremacy, America's Democratic Ordeal and the Forging of Our National Identity. Kennedy says, the ideology of white supremacy, not slavery, proved the more ubiquitous and more enduring institution. It became the standard by which citizenship was defined, and it determined who would prove worthy of power. Indeed, it was a cultural binding force. Well, that will do for a discussion of the post-Civil War. But this whole idea of white supremacy starts to somewhat unravel during the Civil War. I mean, it isn't that the North had given up on white supremacy, but those who wanted to protect the institution of slavery decided to present Northern interest as being other than those that would support white supremacy. And we'll get to that in a minute. I just want to start sharing some slides with you. So today, and bear with me as I bring this up, and for some reason it doesn't want to come up. I'm sorry about that. Here we go. All right. Today I'm going to be discussing Black resistance in the Civil War, of course, freedom and the threat to white supremacy. So no one told Black people that they needed to be free. They knew they wanted to be free. The Civil War starts and you have the slavery route, but people want to get away. And Africans and people of African descent have been tagged as those who should remain enslaved. I'll start here. Let's go back to the beginning. Well, I don't even need that slide. I'm sorry. I'll jump through some other slides. Sorry about that. Let's take a look at the documents. Secession and War as a Means of Preserving White Supremacy. And I have here, this is the declaration of the causes which impelled the state of Texas to secede from the federal union. Most of those states published these, showing why they decided, once Lincoln was elected, to secede, to break away from the Union of States, from the United States. And so I'm just going to use a couple of these for the discussion. A declaration of causes, it said, and when they say she, they mean Texas, was received as a commonwealth holding and maintaining the institution known as Negro slavery. The servitude of the African to the white race within her limits, a relation that had existed from the first settlement of her wilderness by the white race, and which her people intend should exist in all future time. So the servitude of the African to the white race should exist in all future time. And here we go. This that in this free government, all white men are and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights. That the servitude of the African race as existing in these states is mutually beneficial to both bond and free. Again, that the servitude of the African race is mutually beneficial. However, all white men are and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights. And so it goes on and on with this sort of thing. This is the whole piece with their idea of maintaining not just slavery, but white supremacy, and freedom will be a threat to that. Mississippi gets right to it with their justification. I mean, we could go to Georgia, South Carolina, but I don't want to belabor this. I'll just hit a few. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of commerce of the earth. And it goes on, by an imperious law of nature, none but the Black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. They go down because all of these mimic the Declaration of Independence, when the Declaration of Independence states that we need to let a candid world know why the colonies, now the United States, are going to secede from England, going to declare their independence. Well, this is the same thing that these seceding southern states are doing. And so they want to let a candid world, as he says, no, that we do not overstate the dangers to our institution. A reference to a few facts will sufficiently prove why they're seceding. And I just put here in some bullet points here. And they state, it advocates Negro equality socially and politically. The it is the federal government and promotes insurrection and incendiarism in our midst. It advocates Negro equality socially and politically. It goes down about it has enlisted its press, the pulpit, and its schools against us. It sounds like some of the arguments we see today. It has made combinations and formed associations to carry out its schemes of emancipation. And then it says it seeks not to elevate or support the slave, but to destroy his present condition without providing a better. That is the myth that has been started and that they propagate and continue, and neo-Confederates continue to put out, that somehow Africans and people of African descent live better under slavery or with the guidance of those who aren't of the slaveholder. I meant to include in this excerpts from Alexander Stevens, Stephen Alexander, the vice president of the Confederacy, because he really puts it out there as far as the connection between white supremacy and the Confederacy. But I won't. For the sake of time, I'm just going to deal with a couple of more of my slides here. So as the war starts, the war kicks off 1861. They've succeeded in 1860. Civil War starts in 1861. At the start of the Civil War, you have African Americans wanting to join the fight. They realize that this is not just a fight to reunify the country, but for them, it is a blow for freedom. In both the Confederacy and in the Union, their requests to serve are denied. Denied because in the Union or the United States Army, Black men are seen as cowardly. See, the whole idea of serving the country, of becoming a soldier, of the sacrifice that comes with the service, well, that entitles you to citizenship. That entitles the people of your community to citizenship. And it is a badge of manhood, to use an archaic term and an archaic idea to some extent. And so someone who's supposed to be inferior, and we're talking about the northern states and the upper South, those border states that did not secede, those loyal slave states, but even states where slavery no longer existed or had been outlawed, they did not want Black men to serve because that indeed is a threat to white supremacy. See, Frederick Douglass once let the Black man get upon his person the brass letter US, Let him get an eagle on his butt and a musket on his shoulder and bullets in his pocket. There's no power on earth that can deny that he has earned the right to citizenship. If you can maintain somebody in a lower caste, not class, but caste, C-A-S-T-E, if you keep them down, keep them oppressed, if there's discrimination, whether it's job or education or housing, then you maintain their social and political, and if you want to put it, inferiority. You keep them down. You keep them in a lower caste, a subordinate caste. You place them in a subordinate place in society. Well, as we'll see, Black military service then is a threat to the system. The North really doesn't see it at first, but Southerners understand it. Southerners denied the request of free Blacks who themselves thought, okay, if they do secede, if they become a Confederate nation, a new nation, then maybe if we serve, we'll be respected and, as Frederick Douglass says, get citizenship. But the Confederacy realizes you can't allow this, because if you do, we'd have to free the slaves. And I would give you a quote, but I'm going to paraphrase one of the officials. If we enlist soldiers in the Confederacy, it goes against everything that we stand for. If we enlist Black soldiers in the Confederacy, it goes against everything we stand for. Because the Black man who serves is now a citizen or has earned the right. The Black man who served also can call himself a man in these terms. That whole idea of manhood. All right, let me move on. So the Civil War was the first large-scale enlistment of African Americans in the United States Army. I have here, and they were all Black militia units. By the war's end, 179,000 Black men served. 94,000 former slaves from southern states served in segregated units. You do know about the United States colored troops, because out of that you have infantry, men on foot, artillery, men manning the guns, cavalry, soldiers on horseback. 19,000 Black men served in the Union Navy. 40,000 died of wounds, disease, or combat. And their service greatly helped reunify the country, save the Union, save the United States. One group that is missing from here, Black women. Black women. And Black women served not only to help combatants, because they served as spies. You have several of them, including Harriet Tubman, who served as spies. There's a spy, a Black female spy in the Confederate White House, a Black female spy in the home of the head naval engineer of the Confederacy. And they're watching, they're looking, they're reading plans, and they're passing the information back to other spies in Richmond, who then sneak them back through Union lines. If caught, these women would have been executed. The fact that they can sneak in, present themselves as servants, be invisible and spy, that's not just a threat to white supremacy, that sort of upends white supremacy. You're so arrogant, you can't see the enemy in your own midst. So I'll just keep going with this. Wow, I've jumped ahead of myself on that slide. So let's get to the DC area. You have men who will enlist from Maryland and DC. And I do have another slide, which I did not include in this discussion, that goes into all those units. But you have quite a few from Maryland and DC who will serve during the Civil War. 4 will receive the Medal of Honor. At one point, and I put here with newfound respect, our first U.S. colored infantry recruit is on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. Just a little history. The first United States colored infantry was the first United States District of Columbia Volunteers. They're one of those units that kept asking. They formed their own militia. Some of them drilled at Fort Totten with sticks. They were waiting to be called. And when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he placed in a clause that allowed Black men to serve. When it came to the Navy always allowed Black men to serve, but they kept it at 10%. So when the first United States colored infantry started to recruit, And they had a recruiting office on Pennsylvania Avenue. A black man walks in. They didn't give his name. Is carried in the Washington Intelligencer, this story. The journalists, the reporters are out there chronicling this because it's a big event. And one of them witnessed a black recruit come out. He came out, they gave them a little flower to show that they had joined. And he bumps into a white soldier. The white soldier called him, and I'm told not to use the term anymore. I usually will use it in a presentation, but I won't. Calls him the N-word. And the recruit says, watch what you say. You can't call me an N no more. So now this newfound self-respect, this allows these black men who are entering the service to say, yes, I'm a soldier now. And you'll respect that. And you'll respect me as a man. That is resistance to white supremacy. We are equals. Education, you had informal regimental schools in which soldiers would learn to read. The chaplain of the 1st United States Colored Infantry out of Washington, D.C., noted, and there was another one from the 4th United States Colored Infantry, which was mainly recruited in Baltimore. They had been writing to a newspaper, and it was the not the Anglo-African, the Christian Recorder. And the Christian Recorder is the newspaper, it still is, the newspaper or the journal of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And they're writing for reading materials. Please send us spelling books and whatever reading materials that you may have. The men are yearning to learn so they can prepare themselves for the post-war, for their future. So they realized they needed to learn how to read, how to write, how to become literate so that they could function after the war. This is, again, resistance to white supremacy because education has been kept from them. That's one way of keeping you down. That's one way of maybe feeling superior to you. But, that's one way of putting you in a subordinate position. But you can't keep them there. I said soldiers and sailors teaching each other. So the letter to the Anglo-African really was the Christian Recorder. I put Anglo-African here, was from Chaplain Henry McNeil Turner. And the other one that I have is from a pension deposition of a black sailor who's on a ship. And he is asked in his pension after the war, he is wounded, he's injured, and he's trying to get a pension. And in part of this pension, he recounts how he learned to read and write. He said those sailors that could read would teach those of us who could not. And so he said they would get newspapers, whatever kind of reading material they had to help those of us learn to read and write. That's because they needed the education. Roughly, as I say here, 179,000 served in the Army, 19,000 in the Navy, 40,000 died. I've been through that before. 25 African Americans in total received the Medal of Honor, 3 from just that 4th U.S. Colored Infantry out of Baltimore, but others from some of the Maryland, 3 others from the Maryland units will receive that. Before I get to this letter, which is from a guy named Spotswood Rice, one thing I did neglect, and I thought I had included those slides, but I don't need to. The whole idea of white supremacy begins to break down, not just with military service, because when we think of the Civil War and the fight for freedom, we generally think of soldiers and sailors and what they're doing. But many civilians helped to tear down white supremacy at the time, even though they didn't tear it totally down, but they defied it. And it's not just the act of seeking freedom, but open defiance to someone trying to subordinate you. And I'll give examples. When the war starts, African Americans, enslaved African Americans, see this as an opportunity to run. Lincoln's initial policy was to return the enslaved, right? We're going to go, he just wants to show the southern states that if you come back, you can keep your slaves. I'm not here to interfere with slavery. I want to reunify the country. Some people have criticized Lincoln for that, but that was Lincoln's role. He wanted to do away with slavery. In fact, DC Emancipation shows that, because he pushed the whole deal of compensated emancipation. However, he wanted to do that while maintaining the country as a whole. So now he has to try to reunify the country. Problem is, his military officers in the field had different ideas. And as slaves are running away, they're turning them back in. One story from this area is Charles County. It's a man by the name of Samuel Cox. He's a slaveholder. His slave has run away to the Excelsior Brigade, which is stationed out in Charles County, where they're in Southern Maryland. There are open secessionists. So these are Marylanders in a loyal slave state who are openly rebellious. And so you station this New York brigade out there, the Excelsior Brigade. Well, in one of the camps, his enslaved labor has run to the camp and is now working for them as a servant. Now, a lot of these Union soldiers will say, hey, come on in. They know nothing about Black people, most of them. Most of them don't like Black people, but they get to know them. They get to understand and see the enslaved to some extent, right? Remember, white supremacy still exists in the North as well. So you have a situation now where this slave is there, and Cox comes looking for his enslaved laborer, his property. And he encounters the officer and says, I know the man is in there. I heard he's there. I want him back. The soldiers try to stop him. The officer says it's Lincoln's policy, give him back. He promptly throws a rope around this Black man and drags him to death in front of the soldiers. Nothing they can really do. Well, that story is being told because there are other stories that are a little more victorious. It shows you how Lincoln's policy wasn't working, but it also shows you how this will turn people into abolitionists, so to say, or anti-slavery. But you had soldiers in the field who will help out, and this comes about with a big change brought about by General Benjamin Butler, who in 1861, it was July, 3 enslaved men run to his fort at Fortress Monroe, up in Hampton Roads. They present themselves, and asked to speak to the general because they know that their slaveholder is going to come get them, and he did. Or when the general talks to these men, they said, "Well, we're being used to further the military ambitions of your enemy. We cook their food, we bring their supplies, we help to build their fortifications, we nurse the sick." The general realizes that for every one of these men or every one of these women, these enslaved individuals that works for the Confederacy, that works on their fort, they're not working for, they're not getting paid, they're not enlisted, right? They're just enslaved laborers being forced to work. For every one of them, that frees a Confederate to fight. And that they're aiding the war effort. So he then confiscates these people. 3 men. 2 of them have wives and children. They ask permission to go back through enemy lines to get their families, which they do. That's dangerous. Soldiers think they're crazy. Butler thinks they're crazy. But they go back and they tell people, hey, come with us. We're going to sneak back out because this general over here is going to confiscate us as contraband of war. Contraband, it's a legal term. Butler was a lawyer. Anything that could be used to aid the enemy war effort. Within days, there are 200 people presenting themselves to the fort. So they're seeking freedom and defiance, not of just slavery, but of oppression, of white supremacy. And today, if you read this, people will be like, oh, that's cool, that's wild, but it says something, it addresses another myth. And so with this letter, when I get to it, it addresses the myth of the Black father who doesn't care, of the Black man who seems to not be there in the families when so many are. I've read this to students, some African American, and some of the women are like, nah, I don't think they go back. Well, time and time again, they've gone back to get their wives, to get their children. And so you read about many instances. I've seen it with the Navy. Guys came out on a rickety canoe, picked up by a naval vessel in the Potomac. They gave them critical military information, military intelligence, and then asked to go back to get their wives. And the captain of the ship said, he wrote in his journal, I thought them insane. The river's wide, the river's rough, and they could get captured. But they made it there, they made it back, and one of them enlisted in the Navy. So this goes on time and time again. And throughout this period, those who did not run, because their people couldn't run, either they didn't want to deal with the uncertainty, maybe they didn't want to deal with the fear that there's lack of food, maybe they had to stay on the plantation to take care of family or the farm to take care of sick people, but those who stayed became defiant. This defiance, I even saw in my own research. In one journal from a woman, and I did a lot of research on the Northern Neck, she states, these slaves treat us as though they're in charge. See, the men are gone to fight for the Confederacy. They do as they please. Resistance, defiance. One story that I have, and this is, you know, as a historian, you have to verify and validate. This is in Matthew County. And so there's a slaveholder. Her enslaved woman will not obey her, so she took the woman's child and said she won't give it back. Now, how do I know this? Because they kept her diary, and she had diary and papers and all that. That's at those, in all of these counties, they have small historical societies, a lot of stuff in there. It's a wealth of knowledge. And in it, her diary, she stated, in her journal, I should say, she stated that she took the woman's child, and the woman went down to the shore and went and waved to a naval vessel, and the vessel landed. So let me jump to the naval records. So I'm looking at the naval records for the flotilla that this ship belonged to, that cruised that area, and I find it. And in those records, it details cruising by Matthews County. We were signaled by a Negro woman. We landed. Her baby was being withheld. We were able to retrieve her child and food and other items that could be used for the rebels. Go back to the journal. The slaveholder said that her woman singled the ship, and they knew who these ship captains were. And in her journal, she wrote, Captain Street and his, excuse the term, I will have to use it for the sake of the discussion. Captain Street and his niggers landed and took everything I had. Well, what did Captain Street take? He took the slaves. He took the slaves. He took what food she was hiding. He took what items she was hiding. The enslaved individual that he took, they pointed out that her son was hiding. They didn't catch the son. He was home on leave. So here, what do you get from that? One, defiance. Oh, you're going to take my baby? I'm going to get my baby back. I'm going to get them back. This war, this whole situation is going to allow me to resist you. She was able to get her child. What else? Captain Street and his niggers. I hate to use the term, but I will just, please bear with that. That means, in that day of terminology from the slaveholder, that Captain Street landed with a group of Black sailors. Now, I studied the naval unit that landed there, and yes, it was 25% Black, and yes, Captain Street had a significant portion of Black sailors on his gunboat. Yes, they did land, and when those sailors landed, they come off the boat with rifles, pistols, and cutlasses, swords, and they're ready to do battle. So, of course, she was frightened. What does that say? Well, where the hell did these Black sailors come from? They came from Maryland, DC, and Virginia because they were recruited locally. They knew the area, they knew the land, they knew the people. Their service was outright defiance to those slaveholders from the area, outright resistance to white supremacy that says that you're less than. Well, here's a letter from a Black soldier. A lot of us may have seen it. Many I know have. And this letter was unearthed by by the Freedom and Southern Society Project. It was a project at the University of Maryland. They have a website. They publish many of the sources that they dug up. And this is from a soldier named Spotswood Rice. Spotswood Rice is a former slave from Missouri, and he joined the Army, ends up in the hospital, and he was illiterate. And you could tell he's just learning to read and write. And some of the historians think that maybe someone wrote this for him, but that person is probably just learning to read and write. Either way, they're trying to get an education. He wants to send a letter. He sends a letter to his wife, but he also sends a letter to her slaveholder, because her slaveholder wasn't his slaveholder. He lived on a different farm. He says, I received a letter from Caroline telling me that you say I tried to steal, to plunder my child away from you. Now, I want you to understand that Mary is my child, and she is a God-given right of my own. And you may hold on to her as long as you can. But I want you to remember this one thing, that the longer you keep my child from me, the longer you will have to burn in hell, and the quicker you'll get there. For we are now making up about 1,000 Black troops to come up through and want to come through Glasgow. And when we come, woe to be to Copperhood rebels and to slave-holding rebels, for we don't expect to leave them their root nor branch. Check that out. Now these men are under arms and in uniform, right? And they're calling the shots. If this isn't resistance, I don't know what it is. He says, but we think, however, that we that have children in the hands of you devils, we will try your virtues today. We in Glasgow. We want you to understand Kitty Diggs. He calls a woman by her name, not Mrs., not mistress. He calls her by her full name, Kitty Diggs, that wherever you and I meet, we are enemies to each other. I offered once to pay you $40 for my own child. Now that's fatherhood. He's going to pay for his kid. You know, he's coming to get his child no matter what. He's threatening a white woman in the Confederate, not in the Confederacy, but a slaveholding woman who supposedly should be supported by the law. I want you to understand, Kitty Diggs, that wherever you and I meet, we are enemies to each other. Just hold on now as long as you can, and the worst it'll be for you. You never in your life before I came down here did you give children anything, not anything, whatever, not even $1's worth of expenses. I'm going to jump down. My children is my own, and I expect to get them. And when I get ready to come after Mary, I will have about the power and authority to bring her away and to execute vengeances on them that holds my child. That's resistance. You will then know how to talk to me. And I will assure that you will know how to talk right. I just want you to hold on to her if you want to. And then he says, he calls her Kitty Diggs, I have no fears about getting Mary out of your hands. This whole government gives cheer to me, and you cannot help yourself. He will get his children, and he and his wife, and he will live a long life. But here's the thing. He wouldn't have said that 10 years before this, 5 years before this. But during the Civil War, as the slaveholding hierarchy breaks down, as Black people realize that there's a chance for freedom, at taking full freedom, then they are willing and ready to resist white supremacy. I could continue documenting service, sacrifice, and resistance through military contribution in this war and remaining wars. Because after every war, after every major war, whether it's Civil War, whether it's the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korea, and even Vietnam, where it's not so much civil rights, but Black power, Black people have demanded equality, have resisted white supremacy. And I have here our service to the nation came in many forms, not just military. Our resistance is varied as well. And you'll see that whether it's military, whether it's education, vocational, political activism, social uplift, just everyday success is resistance to an idea, an ideology that permeates much of our society. Let's bring it to today, as we know that with the Civil War, And so this is the second iteration of a Civil War era in a way. People are saying tear down the statues. And when I talk about white supremacy, I'm not talking about white devils and black angels. That's not what I'm getting at. Because they're what people want to call white allies, or they're white people. There are white people who resist white supremacy, right? So then you have those people who want to tear down the Civil War memorials because they realize that these are memorials to, or statues and whatever, to white supremacy, not just the Confederacy. The Confederacy died, slavery died, white supremacy continued. So I have here the continued struggle. Julian Carr, and I believe I need to check the date on this again. In the 19-teens, he dedicated a statue of a Confederate soldier, and it was to memorialize and commemorate the alumni of University of North Carolina who fought in the Civil War. And he was a veteran himself. He's one of those alumni from the University of North Carolina that fought in the Civil War, of course, fought for the Confederacy. And so we're dealing now 50, 60 years later. This is after the Civil War. He's an old man. And the daughters of the Confederate veterans, they're erecting these statues, right? The United Daughters of the Confederacy are erecting these statues throughout the South. They're putting political pressure on school systems to adopt history books that are friendly towards the Confederacy and slavery. Oh, sounds somewhat like today. I shouldn't say that, though. But the Julian Carr speech is out there, and you can read it. This Confederate veteran himself states, the present generation of the 19-teens, I am persuaded, scarcely takes notes of what the Confederate soldier meant to the welfare of the Anglo-Saxon race during the 4 years immediately succeeding the war, when the facts are that their courage and steadfastness saved the very life of the Anglo-Saxon race in the South, when the bottom rail was on top, meaning when Black people for a brief time were able to get a little something in that time period, were able to, when slavery died in the South during the early parts of Reconstruction, you had people running for office and gaining some kind of political power. And it says all over the southern states. And today, as a consequence of the pure strain of the Anglo-Saxon race is to be found in the 13 southern states. Praise God. He goes on to say, I trust I may be pardoned for one illusion, howbeit it is rather personal. 100 yards from where we stand, less than 90 days perhaps after my return from Appomattox, he was there when Lee surrendered, I horsewhipped a Negro wench until her skirts hung in shreds, because upon the streets of this quiet village, she had publicly insulted and maligned a Southern lady, and then rushed for protection to these university buildings where was stationed a garrison of 100 federal soldiers. I performed this pleasing duty in the immediate presence of the entire garrison. What does this mean? Civil War ended, slavery ended. Here's a Black woman. She probably did nothing more, and we don't know, but nothing more than not get off the sidewalk. Or maybe if she was insulted, she responded to the insult. And this man took a horsewhip and beat her clothes until they were torn to shreds. The struggle continued. And with this whole idea of the Civil War, the struggle continues. Here's a man with a flag. He says, my people died because of this flag. And a Black man says, so did mine. How did the Black man's family die? Either they died in the war, or they died because of what that flag represents. Not just the Confederacy, but as we saw, that underlying issue of white supremacy. His arms are folded in defiance. Even though this is a political cartoon, it says a lot. The anger and the resistance. I have our roles as historians and history enthusiasts is to help the ordinary person place themselves and their family members in the constant struggle to use family and personal history as a means of inspiring future, and there should be generations in eradicating destructive myths. Indeed, through our work, we need to help dismantle the myth of white supremacy. And in saying that, we need to spread that history, the history of DC emancipation. I have a classmate who's here, Dr. Tamara Brown, and she knows that I get a little hot under the collar about Juneteenth. I didn't celebrate Juneteenth because, you know, people act as though that is sometimes the only Emancipation Day, but it is not. There are many. I'm now in Maryland. Their Emancipation Day is November 1st, right? So the thing is, I come to a conclusion and I began to accept that Juneteenth celebration is a good day to celebrate emancipation. We can roll all emancipation celebrations into that. But along with that, the discussion, because it comes out of the Civil War, is to discuss resistance during the Civil War issue, resistance to white supremacy, and to promote not just equality, but equity, because that's what those people were fighting for. I'm not going to continue on. This is something that is a work in progress. So I want to thank you all for allowing me to come and speak to you or speak with you on Emancipation Day. And thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Davidson. And we're going to open it up for questions. We do still have some time. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand and I'll call on you so you can speak. And for those of you, I did give you power to unmute and turn on your camera. So be cool. Dr. Brown. Yes.
Good evening. I apologize. I cannot turn on my camera because I have COVID and look horrible. But Dr. Davidson, you talked about how many of the soldiers received at least a rudimentary education.
Yes.
How did, or can you tell us how some of them furthered this after the war was over? I'm specifically thinking like the founding of
Lincoln University.
Lincoln University.
Right. No, they did. I mean, and that's one thing I did not, like I said, this is something I'm putting together and I have different presentations that I'm putting together, but the whole idea of education and white supremacy after the war, yeah, several of them, the Black men and women did found various educational institutions. Lincoln University, 65th U.S. Colored Infantry put their money together to erect a school, which will later become Lincoln University. Others will join with the Freedmen's Bureau in their efforts to create schools throughout the South. And then just the basic, you go home and each one teach one. That's something we used to see the t-shirts in Howard University back in the 90s. People would erect churches. And so you had a lot of veterans involved in civil affairs, trying to get these things done. In DC, as a matter of fact, and I may be mispronouncing his name, but there was a soldier who was a sergeant from the 1st United States Colored Infantry named Hutton, who will become politically active and seek to desegregate the streetcars and push for more money to help with education and other things with the formerly enslaved.
Thank you. You mentioned Howard University in the 1990s. I was just a baby. I don't know of what you speak.
Oh my God.
I'm joking.
I'd like to take a chance. I just want to, say hello to another classmate, I believe, who's here, Ida Jones, Dr. Ida Jones, and to a colleague, Dr. De'Ara Robertson. So it's good to see you all here.
So does anyone else have another question? If not, I'll ask a question. Well, question come. So I'll ask. One of the things that I notice is that African Americans volunteer to participate in military service as a way of showing their patriotism.
Right.
And saying that they are worthy of citizenship. And why do you think they continue to feel this way, even though, like after the Revolutionary War, they didn't get it? After War of 1812, they didn't get it. Civil War didn't get it? Why do you think they kept going?
Because there were continued struggles between the wars. People continued to push for citizenship and full rights, even though they didn't get it. And if they didn't serve, on the other hand, it'd be said, well, you guys didn't even contribute. And that's why it's so important, and hope people don't take this the wrong way. Usually when you see stuff, patriotic stuff out here, some country guy, twanging a guitar, singing about freedom isn't free. Well, no, freedom wasn't free. And the flag didn't always favor or love those who fought and died for it. So yeah, that's why I believe there was a continued effort. But that continued effort begins to stall out after Vietnam, or even during Vietnam, because they're saying, hey man, until we get what we need at home, you're not going to get anything here. And that's where you get the beginnings of that Black Power movement, and it filters into the military.
So I have another. I know we are in DC, but there is a very interesting situation that happens in Maryland when emancipation happens. In DC, it was compensated. The
Right.
slaveholders received payment, but in Maryland on November 1st, they did not receive payment.
Right.
And so the slaveholders took the children of their now former slaves to court. Could you tell us a bit about
Well, that had to do with the orphans court and apprenticeship. And so, when I said after the war, there's a continued battle. You have a situation where the soldiers and sailors come home, and they find that the slaveholders want to maintain a status quo antebellum. They want to maintain slavery one way or another. So to control the parents, you allow the orphan courts to give you the children. The justification was that the formerly enslaved could not properly raise their children or govern themselves. It took the federal government to come in and stop that. Another thing is that they wanted to control labor. Of course, they wanted to control the people, but they wanted to control labor and force Black people back onto the land in Maryland. And when you get out into the areas along the shore, what these former African-American soldiers and sailors do, they go back to some of the stuff they did as the enslaved. They would go out on canoes and boats, and they would oyster and fish. A Black oysterman could make as much as a white laborer in a week as a white laborer made in a month. And the only way they could control them then was they passed a tax on oystermen. And that tax was only for Black oystermen, and white oystermen who weren't law officials or law enforcement could enforce that. And so there are many, many ways to try to get them back, but every time there was resistance. Right? They found a way around it. There were Quakers out there that would rent land to Black men. It wasn't large amounts of land, but it was enough to truck farm. So they could oyster and farm and make enough money to maintain some independence, some kind of economic autonomy.
And my last question, to bring it back to DC, is what really makes emancipation in DC unique in terms of the Black experience? What would you say, in your opinion?
For the Black experience, DC had a large Black population, and there were a few Washingtonians who owned their relatives because they purchased them so that they could be free, and then they kept them enslaved, technically to protect them. But it's the compensated aspect, the fact that Lincoln would push to get the government to pay, and that he didn't really push for colonization, didn't force it with Washingtonians. To give Black people in DC more agency because you had a Black majority. And Dr. Jones can speak better to this. Even before Lincoln, there were people coming out of PG County and Montgomery County coming into DC, running away from slavery. And these so-called fugitives were harbored by the free African-American community. So yeah, it was DC's community was unique in that regard. They were already activists.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. If we don't have any other questions, I will share that we have another program coming up next week with Niani Kilkenny here at the DC Archive. So here is a link for our other programs in case you missed it. As Secretary Bassett mentioned, we have a weekend of events happening with Mayor Bowser. And so I'm sharing the link for that in the chat as well. Bill Branch, I see you're typing. Would you like to say something? Or are you just typing? I'll let him type. There we go. He says, oh, please elaborate a little more about the first USCT and their campaign.
Oh man, I could do a whole nother hour on that. But the thing about the first U.S. Colored Infantry, in fact, instead of me elaborating, I have to just, because we don't have much time left, I don't know if this cuts off. I'll give you two stories. The first USCT operates mainly in Virginia, right? And they go in for briefly in North Carolina and occupation in South Carolina. But they were part of Wild's African Brigade, and at one time they were, and so they brigaded with the fourth U.S. Colored CT out of Baltimore, the 22nd out of Philadelphia. So they're pretty good bunch of guys. And when they go through Virginia, there's an incident in which they come across a slaveholder who's whipping two Black women. Now, I mean, this guy must be doing this just to make a show of it, to make a statement. And one of the sergeants has disarmed the slaveholder. A commotion erupts. Colonel E.A. Wild is on his horse. He comes down the road and he says, what's going on? And they tell him the slaveholder's whipping these two women. And he asks the sergeant, well, Sergeant, what do you want him to do? What do you want to do? The sergeant has his men take the slaveholder, tie him to the post, and gives the whip to the women. And they move on. E.A. Wild is almost court-martialed for allowing that to happen. When they're going through North Carolina and heading south, the chaplain is surprised to see all the burning by the white soldiers. He said the Black soldiers are generally respectful. But at one point, Henry McNeil Turner says, and this is another one of the sergeants, another one of the non-commissioned officers, we get to a house and we're trying to clear the area of any possible rebels. And in it, the slaveholding owner of the home was speaking saucily, as he put it, to this sergeant. And he said the sergeant struck him and the slaveholder's downward mobility was accelerated by boot leather, meaning that these soldiers weren't taking any crap. And then he wrote, when he was doing occupation, he said the soldiers were distributing food and supplies to former slaveholders. And that's the bottom rail on top now. And he says, all these hungry white people are coming to me for food. And I, a Negro. I was like, wow. But when you want to get into the battles, they fought at Fairmarket Heights. Their record. They fought at Wilson's Wharf. They did not retreat. They were at Petersburg with the Wiles Brigade, and they pushed through. Had they been allowed to continue fighting, they may have broken the lines at Petersburg, and there may not have been a need for a siege, but they were pulled back by the commanding general. In fact, in that battle, Henry McNeil Turner wrote, he said the rebels flew a black flag, meaning no surrender. And at that point, since they weren't going to surrender, the Black troops were recounting a massacre in Tennessee at Fort Pillow. And the Black soldiers were screaming, remember Fort Pillow. And he said, when his men took off, we had to try to pull them back. As the Confederates tried to surrender, remember, they were the ones that flew the black flag. He said, our men were shooting them in the back, clubbing them with rifles, and bayoneting them. So yes, the first U.S. Colored Infantry, excuse the term, was badass. But so were those Maryland infantry units that were fighting. If you're from Maryland, be damn proud of your U.S. Colored Infantry units coming from there. But being a Washingtonian, I'm very proud of the first United States Colored Infantry.
Thank you for that. I think that is a great place to end this discussion. I like to respect people's time. I said we have an hour, so yeah, respect people's time. And so thank you all for coming. I appreciate you. We'll give you a clap. Yes, there, a clap in the chat. So thank you so much, Dr. Davidson, for giving us your time and sharing that wonderful history with us. I always love to hear about Black soldiers. I wrote a book on Black soldiers. So
You sure did.
thank you, inspiration. So thank you again. And Secretary Bassett, I see you're back. Would you like to send us out? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Hold on.
It was wonderful, just what I expected. Thank you so much, Dr. Davidson. You were amazing. Guys, have a great night, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.